This video is intended to make sense of our paragraph that now we have a trait for, or a general topic for, and that we already have some ideas about its description of freedom and equality, and create an assertion. So we're going to build an assertion, and we're going to build a concluding sentence for the paragraph that we have mostly in front of us right now. So my first step then is to go ahead and consider how I see this relentless direction in this paragraph, and to see how spiritual freedom is seen as urgent. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and provide you with my concluding. I'm going to go ahead and provide you with what I have written for this one. I actually came up with two ideas, and both of them could be weeded out now. So I first started by thinking about, all right, what did he use to present himself as relentlessly direct? And so you'll notice that actually my first idea has two sentences, basically to offer as the assertion for this paragraph. And that's allowable. The first one is the stronger one. The second one just provides a little bit more detail before getting into the content. I consider that more like a transitional sentence that is used to connect the prompt to the assertion and this paragraph. So simplification I got from my first chunk, where his choice of the signal word in short, or signal phrase in short, because he's trying to conclude something briefly in the middle of his lesson to basically let his audience know the key idea if they have lost him throughout his very long speech. So simplification, point of view. Point of view has to do with this chunk where there was a tone shift to the use of the word you. And so it's more direct. And then the third one, word choice, which I felt like connects both to in short and where this last chunk is dealing with these metaphors. And so what I did here was to kind of combine those three strategies, and I said simplification, point of view, and word choice combine as rhetorical methods Edwards uses. Now, to do what? To present himself, because this is his characterization of himself, to his audience as relentlessly direct. Remember in the previous video, I said that, it's fine to say direct, or it's fine to say loving or brave or whatever. But if you can add a modifier to the front of that, of course, you're strengthening and demonstrating, you're strengthening your phrasing and your ideas. You're showing yourself as a deeper thinker, and you are also asserting something that's more mature than you might have a few years ago in 5th, 6th, or 7th grade. And so this is a higher level objective to not just give a single word, but also to modify that. We know there's many different types of directness. We know there's many different types of love. All right. So he is relentlessly direct. What did I not cover here? Well, I haven't covered the freedom. And I have to do that with my assertions. Otherwise, I'm not answering the prompt and I'm not guiding this, right? So I'm connecting it now. This directness is the only way he seems to believe he can convince his audience of the urgency of choosing to become spiritually free. All right, so directness has to do with how does characterization. He's direct. Directness reveals something, right? He knows that it's the only way he can get his audience to see the urgency. What does he believe about spiritual freedom? That it's urgent. You can't wait around for it. You've got to do it now. And so I've addressed the prompt. I've also done it here. Idea 2. The freedom Edwards is about is spiritual. And by presenting himself, so I've addressed now the freedom, and I actually kind of inverted the ideas here, right? I started it with the idea about freedom. And by presenting himself as relentlessly, get that right, direct, he is able to begin to convince his audience of the urgency. So the same ideas here, the urgency of choosing to become spiritually free. Now, you'll also see that I combined a second sentence with this one because I actually felt like it was important to include the simplification, point of view, and selective word choice. You do not always have to do this. I was wanting to address the author's intention a little bit more specifically here because I did in my paragraph, but you'll notice in my second example in a minute that I don't have a two-sentence assertion with the next one. So he uses simplification, point of view, and selective word choice to effectively characterize himself this way. And my next test here would be, does your assertion flow well with the next one? You say, well, what about your two options here, Mr. Summers? What are you going to do? Which one are you going to select? Well, I'm going to look at my structuring and decide which one flows best into what I have. So, do I like selective word choice to effectively characterize himself this way? Edward simplifies a section of his sermon on people's sinful condition, saying, or do I like this directness is the only way he seems to believe he can convince his audience of the urgency of choosing to become spiritually free? Edward simplifies a section of his sermon. So what I really like, actually, is we introduce immediately simplification and then give a moment of a break for the reader's mind, in a sense, to get away from that simplification and think about the spiritual freedom, and then come back to it. So I'm actually going to use this one in my paragraph. So there you go. So now I've got my assertion sentence, which now I can indent. Simplification, point of view, and word choice combined as rhetorical methods Edwards uses to present himself to his audience as relentlessly direct. This directness is the only way he seems to believe he can convince his audience of the urgency of choosing to become spiritually free. Edwards simplifies a section of his sermon on people's sinful condition, saying, and so that's going to then follow. All right? Next, you'll also notice that I have a concluding sentence that I need to put in. So what I have chosen here is I've looked back at my content, and I know that I probably need to, especially because I've chosen kind of choppy commentary, and I'm choosing to put those things in, I probably need to come back to remind the reader of the purpose here, spiritual freedom. That's the message or the belief of Edwards seen through his characterization. So I have said the decision to pursue spiritual freedom, like seeking any other type of freedom. You think about our country and soldiers, sacrifices for our country. That's the pursuit of freedom. It's not easy. Directness is Edwards' way. You can see that even I need to go back and proofread. You noticed me fixing a few things. Of motivating his audience to not be concerned with its costs. So you see how I come back to the ideas of the freedom here, and I even asserted or reminded the reader of his directness. That was the focus of this paragraph. And I plug in my concluding sentence. Now, for my second one, rather than kind of going through and giving you my entire thought processes, what I want to show you is just that this one is a single sentence. So I looked at my content, and in this one, I did not specifically go into detail about the choices that are made, but I did allude to them. So souls are precious, and his unyielding love is seen in this. So that was the trait, and his ideas here is the spiritual freedom is desirable because others have made it possible through sacrifice and intentional selflessness. He himself, to some extent, is making sacrifices. For example, this is a tough sermon to preach. People might get mad at him. People might get angry, and yet he's still preaching it. And so there is a type of selflessness in his message, but also there's the selflessness of Christ, whom he says has thrown the door open. So Edwards presents himself with an unyielding love. There is his trait, one that intimates that everyone should desire spiritual freedom. And here's the spiritual freedom. Everyone should desire it as a selfless response to Christ's demonstration of mercy. All right? So this is my assertion. So what I will now do is I'm going to plug that in there. The speaker wants. That's the next step. Does it seem to flow in? Am I choppy? Am I redundant? Is my structure the exact same? I think this one flows pretty well. It does not seem like it's repeating itself over and over and over. And then my concluding sentence for this one is, despite using such dreadful language to describe the eternal horrors of hell. Notice the end is this escape. I really want to play on that because it is a concluding idea in itself. That's why I put it last. Edwards's emotional appeals that shift quickly between affection, this first section, precious souls, opportunity, quick shift from affection, but shifts between affection and fear combined. Combined to make him as loving rather than hateful. And so that ultimately is this message about what? It's a message that says he has an unyielding love. Do you see that? He's not hateful, he's loving. And I addressed the nature of his appeals as the means of him being characterized that way. All right, and so that would be this paragraph's final sentence. Now, do you notice that actually does wrap it up? Because here it actually ended with a description of an illusion that I felt like could have had more commentary added to it to explain that illusion in case a reader doesn't know anything about Lot and Lot's wife in the book of Genesis in the Bible. But that's something that I would assume my reader could look up. I don't have to overly explain that, and I can explain it just simply that way. And so, with that being said, I can then transition, despite using such dreadful language. What kind of dreadful language? Well, one in which Edward says, escape, that's dreadful, and as well as, don't look behind, don't be consumed, and definitely don't turn into a pillar of salt like Lot's wife, who turned and looked back at the city of Sodom and Gomorrah when those cities were being destroyed by God. All right? Well, that's this task. Now, this is what you will do with each of the 3 body paragraphs before going up to your introduction paragraph and your conclusion. This is my encouragement, at least. And then once you have that thesis statement and it's solid, you can finish your introduction and then build your conclusion. And once that's done, we will then go back and edit your writing to make sure transitional phrases are there, and to make sure that it meets the criteria for the proficiency scales for expository writing and for the use of language and how it's crafted, and you vary your sentence structure and so on, as well as any other expectations we have. So I'll create another video just to kind of reflect on those things. Thesis statements next.